Nice toboggan.
Oh, you like the hat? It's freezing,
No,
man. Six. No, what?
no, I'm not a toboggan guy, especially on grown men.
What is it? A toboggan, a hat?
It's what you have on top of your head while you're inside.
16 degrees in my
Hey,
house. We're conserving the heat, so we are doing our part to conserve the grid, keeping it down to about 66 degrees here, man.
you're channeling your inner lumber sexual.
Sure. Paul Bunyan.
Yeah. um. All right. So, if you're listening, we're recording, by the way, Micah. Welcome to now officially the fastest growing podcast for producers in the United States.
Did you make that up?
Yeah, I just made it up.
I like it.
Sounds pretty cool.
Pretty spiffy.
Yeah. Um. So in today's podcast, we are going to talk about um outliers, comparing yourself to others, networking versus referrals. We got a couple of things on the slate here to talk about. And here's the long story short. I know you try to stay off of LinkedIn, so I don't know how much you see or whatever, but I put up a post yesterday and it basically said something like this. Okay, so you hear about a guy putting up 400K, cool. But what I want to know is, how did they really do it? Did they do it from scratch? Were they handed their book and then, that spun off referrals? Do they have an exclusive product? Whatever. Long story short, 99% of the time, you don't get the full story. Stop comparing yourself to others, run your own race, that type of deal. And I got a bunch of DMs, and there was some, I think maybe obviously it's on me. I didn't do a great job of clarifying a couple of things. So one thing is when I said gifted accounts, I just want to clarify this. I don't think getting a referral is being gifted anything. I think we both agree that client referrals are, uh, you know, the lifeblood of any
The
long
Holy
term.
Grail.
Yeah, the holy grail of a book. So I got no beef with that. No beef at all. When I said gifted, what I meant was they were handed a book, and then does the book spin off referrals, right? So that's what I meant by that. And just to clarify, I don't think either one of us, and we've talked about this in the podcast, actually have any hard feelings about anybody who is bequeathed a book of business. Um, we talk a lot about like, oh, inherited your book from daddy or all that, but you know, just secret, don't tell anybody. It's just marketing. We're just trying to dog whistle to the people out there in producer land who could benefit from what we have. That's really it. Shoot, if somebody wanted to hand me a big book, I'll take it, but we actually don't have any beef with that. This is, life's not fair. Get a help. We all had advantages and disadvantages. Like, you just got to do what you got to do to win the game. And some people start off further ahead than others, and that's fine. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I would say it's 100% fair. We have no, I know for sure. Yeah, you don't, I don't have any ill will towards anybody how you build your book. I mean, whether it's social media, whether it's networking, whether it's drop-ins, whether it's being gifted or being seeded accounts, and you work those deals and you maintain them. Let's be real; it takes skill to keep a seeded account. It's not like it just, you know. But is that easier than writing something from scratch? Absolutely, 100%. I'll back that till the day I die. But I have no issue, and I still think there's a skill set in all that. So
Say if we have an issue, the only issue we would have is say someone is handed something and then they're put in charge of teaching other people how to do it. Next thing you know, they're leading the producer development program. Meanwhile, they didn't do it on their own, right? And then maybe, I would say in our industry, there's not a lot of people really telling the true story behind how they did it. So I think, that's my, if I had beef, that would be it. Like if you didn't do it, just don't, if you didn't do it the way I'm trying to do it, just don't tell me how to do it. That's all I really have to say on that. Um, but I put out the newsletter last night, and it's called the Ozempic of ProducerLand. And before I get into what it said, when you saw that title, were you like, "Oh shit, what is this?"
He's at it again, man.
Did you know what
Marketing
Ozempic
genius.
is?
Yeah,
Do you
I
know what
think
Ozempic is?
you'd have to be living under a rock to not at least have an idea of what Ozempic is. But yeah, it's basically a shot you take that is like a miracle shot and helps you lose weight. People have been losing tens and tens of pounds, maybe hundreds of pounds with this deal. So my only thinking on Ozempic again, I don't care if someone takes it. You admitted to taking it. My only question would be kind of like other shots potentially. What's the long-term side effects and consequences, and have those been thoroughly tested? So we don't know that, and that's what I would be, curious about. Anyways, that's getting off topic. I think you just
Yeah.
used it as
What is Bill Gates putting in those shots? That's what. But anyways, um, uh, so anyways, I'm just gonna try to frame this up real quick. Basically, what I said was, I'm, making the point that comparing your success or lack thereof to other people's success is a bad idea. And then I go on to give an example. In the last 7 days, and this is absolutely true, I'm not making this up, I spoke to or heard from a producer who did 100K last month via Twitter, a producer who did 400K last year via LinkedIn alone, and a producer who did 700K in his first 2 years. Now, is any of that true? I have no idea. I don't know. And to be honest with you, it would be awesome if it is, because that means that there is a better way to play the game. There's a bigger way to play the game, and I'm if I can win this producer game by not having to do prospecting, I will do it in 5 seconds flat. I know you get off by making cold calls, but if I could hone my social media chops to do that, to write $100,000 to $200,000 a year, I would do it in 2 seconds. But my experience is there is always more to the story than what you're told. And maybe every one of those things are true that they said. And like, again, I hope they are, but you never know. So you're kind of caught in this limbo between, all right, well, do you try to go out and trailblaze and pioneer this new way of doing things, or do you, maybe approach it with a healthy, dose of skepticism? What do you think when you hear stuff like this?
I'm kind of like you. It's like, okay, that's awesome, right? And it also, I think anyone who's trying to improve, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, okay, am I doing something or missing something that I should be doing that I'm not doing? I mean, I think that's important. And so that's kind of one area, they talk about the comparison trap, and I know that's kind of what the point of this letter was in your post. But I actually think, for me, sometimes comparison, if it's honed in correctly and you don't let it just run rampant in your mind, can be fuel, right? It can be actually a good barometer to help you improve. Because it's just like when we talk with clients about benchmarking or doing due diligence, how do you know what you don't know? So if you're in your own little world and you're like, I'm crushing it, man, I'm writing 50K per year, I'm, all through drop-ins. Well, that's awesome. But how do you know you couldn't be doing 500K per year through social media or cold calling or just any other different method? So I think that's where the whole like comparison sometimes gets a bad rap. And I know, I'm speaking contrary to the point of your letter, but like, you and I don't necessarily have to agree on every little thing, but that it's just there's nuance, right? So I think it depends how you use comparison is important. But one other thing to just keep in perspective here is outliers, right? I will be the first to admit. I was thinking about this the other day. I look back at my whole life. I've always been like not in the bottom half, not in the top 10%. I've always been like 25th, 30th percentile. Like I'm like your B plus student. I am your second team all conference high school athlete. I'm your, like at Marsh, I was like probably top 30%, 25%, never top 10%, right? And I can admit that, right? So whether that's good or bad, and do you want to stop listening to me now because I'm not the top 1 to 5 percentile? That's fine. But not everyone can be the top 5 or 10%, right? Or you can be, but not everyone is. And so I'm always trying to get there. I'm not going to beat myself up over trying to get there, but you have to realize there's just outliers. We're not all swimmers are Michael Phelps, right? Not all life insurance agents are Ben Feldman. If you don't know who that is, go check him out. The greatest life insurance salesman of all time. Not all, you keep going on and on and on. Not everyone's Alex Hormozy, right? But it doesn't mean you can't learn from these people, but you have to keep a balance in your head and know, like, okay, these are the outliers. I'm not going to just beat myself up and get depressed and get all discouraged because they're so great and I'm only here. But I think if you use that comparison correctly, you can use the Alex Hormozis, the Michael Phelps, David Goggins, all those people to improve yourself, right? And you're your own competition, I think. Um, but I think you do need some benchmarks. You need some outside perspectives to grow. Otherwise, you kind of just stay in your little bubble and you just don't know, really. It's like the 4 minute mile, right? You've mentioned that in several past episodes. Like no one knew they could break until someone broke it. And so technically that's comparison, right? Like, wow, that guy broke it, and people started comparing mentally, like, man, if he could do it, I could do it too. Doesn't mean everyone who tries to do it can do it, but there's maybe someone who used to be at a 6 who now can do a 5 that never could have got there if he didn't see someone do the 4. So I don't know if any of
No,
that
I
made sense, but yeah, went
no,
off
I
a rant.
completely agree, and I don't think that you're saying anything contrary to what I mean, and maybe I'm not doing a great job of articulating it. Um, so I don't know if I've ever shared this on the podcast, but I'm about 12 years sober. And one of the whole thing about getting sober is, and I'm going to go off a little bit of tangent, but then I'll tie it back in, is that like you can try to stop drinking, but what you really got to do is what it's really about is changing who you are and what's inside of you and quote unquote plugging into a heart. Really comes down to just you have to change as a person before you can actually change your behavior. And so one of the things that they would always say is like you don't compare your insides to other people's outsides. And that really resonated with me, and that's really what I'm getting at here is whether it's social media or whatever it is we walk around and we see everybody's highlight reel on social media, or you walk down the street and you see some guy gets in this Land Rover and he's dressed to the nines and he looks like he just sneezes $100 bills, and meanwhile you're struggling to pay your grocery bill and you're like, shit, this just like I'm losing. And so my point is, like, you don't know what that guy's going through behind the scenes. You don't know what advantages or disadvantages or whatever. So that's really what I'm getting at, is just to run your own race wherever you find yourself. Run your own race. If you want to use other people as goals or motivation, I am game. I am all for not just accepting the status quo and just being mediocre. That's not what I'm advocating for at all. What I'm saying is um, there's unless you know the full context or have the whole story, when you do see outliers like that, to then compare yourself to that and cut yourself down or negative self-talk, well, that's really what I'm getting at, because they're outliers by the very definition of what it means to be an outlier. An outlier means not normal, like top 1%. So if you want to strive for that, great, go for it. I'm not saying not to do that, but it's if not done correctly, comparison can also be a real hindering. Um, I'm
Discouraging.
saying it can be a trap. Yeah, if not done correctly. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I know you and I have talked along. I love that quote. Don't compare your insides to others' outsides. I mean, that's awesome. And a lot of, different directions you can go with that. But yeah, I know what you're trying to say. Um, and I think ultimately what we want people to understand, and we're in the trenches like you, right? You listening. We're building our books of business. We're not speaking at anyone from a pedestal or saying that, we're not some overlord telling you how to do things, how to not do things, and run your career. We're just kind of sharing what our experience has been and what we've seen work well and what we've seen not work so well, and sharing with you guys like you know yeah, our personal processes. And I think even like when we created the producer playbook, or even my cold calling method, it's like it's I think the reason I like it is because it's not for people that are the outliers, right? I think it's something that any common folk can take, implement, and see some success with, and build a successful insurance career. And that's ultimately our goal. Is like anyone listening to this, hopefully you guys get better, and if you want to stay in insurance and get better at it and be successful at it, hopefully this podcast, our course, our material helps you achieve that. And we firmly believe in our heart of hearts that our approach, well, it might not be what you want to hear always, or it might, you know, not be that fancy claim to fame, like, hey, press this button and you'll get, take this shot of Ozempic and you'll be $1 million producer. There's hard work involved, but I do feel like it can be applied to anybody. Literally anybody listening could take this, apply it, and build out a decent career. And I know that because I told you just a couple minutes ago, I'm average. Like, I am the typical slightly above average person when it comes to you look at all my whole life. I'm in the, you know, 20th to 35th percentile of everything I do, which is not bad, but hey, I'm trying to get to the top 10. I'm 38, so maybe I'll get there at some point in my life. But so anyways, this is what I've used. This is, you've applied, and I think it works. I hope it does for anyone trying. And we're here
The
to support y'all. You know.
and I was afraid this might happen, but as soon as I sent out that newsletter, of everything in that newsletter, what do you think? Of course, there was people that responded. They're like, "Hey, man, I appreciate it. I really needed to hear that. I've been caught in the comparison trap. Appreciate it." But what do you think is even the more likely email from that?
Someone's offended. They probably read the title and think like, "Oh, are you bashing me because
Uh,
I took Ozempic? I have health issues," or I'm not
no,
taking
no,
the easy route.
no. It was actually, "Hey, can you connect me with that guy who did stuff with Twitter?"
Oh,
In the email,
yeah,
I'm literally telling you, that approach cautiously, and they wanted the shortcut. It's not that it's a
yeah,
shortcut, but I'm saying, like, nobody. That's really it, man. Nobody. I I've know very few people that get their rocks off from cold calling, and I'm one of them. It's a love hate. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. If someone would give me another way, I would do it. I really would. And I would say, from a social media standpoint, I would say I've got as good a chops as anybody, just from my past background and experience. And I still can't connect the dots. I don't see it. I can see it growing, the max revenue thing, but the B2B, I just I just can't see the benefit there. Now, of course, let's go back to the outlier thing. Of course, there are always outliers. Okay. Um, let me see how to say this without getting in trouble.
let's talk about this quick, because
Okay, go ahead.
I want to know the person who wrote 700 in 2 years. Did you talk to that person?
No, they sent me a DM.
Okay. What
So
are the
that's my
details
point.
on that?
I
Do you
don't have
have
the
any?
details.
Okay,
No,
so you
that's my
just, yeah,
point.
gotcha. Because that's the one
Yeah.
there. I was
So
like, what? That's insane. That's awesome. But I guess, come to think of it, I work with a guy who's done 700 a year plus for 3 years straight.
yes.
So, and again,
Yep.
you
And
know, you
again,
talk
there
with
are
him,
outliers, right?
correct, and you've talked to him. He not like his personality's gonna blow your socks off. You're not just gonna listen to a conversation with the guy and be like, "Oh my gosh, no wonder people must just be falling over at your feet like with a BOR in hand. Please sign this, Mister." Like, just But he obviously there's certain things with his process he's done that have worked really well. We've talked about it before. I think micro niching down and becoming an expert in a very, very unique space that people pay a lot of premiums in, and having a really strong background as a risk manager and stuff like that. So there's different things. It doesn't take anything away from anybody that's the outlier either. That's the other thing. We're not trying to take things away from people who are the
Exactly.
outliers. It's like, use what got you there, and hey, leverage that. I mean, whatever that's the cool part. I think there's been a lot of talk about authenticity. Man, I read this quote a couple of weeks ago. I really like this. Like, people said, stop trying to be original, because if you try to be original, you just get goofy, wacky, right? Because you're trying so hard to be original, you just come across as phony. Instead, just be authentic, right? Just be real. Like, and I kind of like that. I can't remember who said it. I'd give him credit. It was in some book or a podcast, but I really think that's the key to all this is like, be your authentic self, and those outliers, hey, they're taking it, they're running with it, it's working for them. It's just, as the sales folks, if that feels like your authentic self, like you want to be, maybe a social media star or whatever, and you feel like that can leverage and lead to results, then go for it. If that's your strong suit. But even this is kind of funny. I didn't plan on really going here, but we created a course, what, 6, 7 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
If we shared our results with other people in the space who've created courses and try to make, have money made online, we're technically probably in the outlier, wouldn't you say? I mean, you're more the expert in that space than I am, but in terms of
Yeah,
number
I
of
mean,
products sold in 6 months, essentially.
yeah, with just organic traffic because we don't run ads. Yeah, we
Yeah,
would 100% be an outlier.
correct. So now if we could go create a LinkedIn post right now today talking about, hey, do you want to make more money in 2024? Here's what we did, and you guys are like, oh my gosh, let's talk. It's like, what you don't see is that Trey has 10 years of background doing social media stuff. What you don't see is Micah has 13 years of insurance sales experience and have been building my LinkedIn audience and so coming together, we created something that worked pretty well, right? But there's just a lot of things you guys don't see, and you wouldn't see.
Exactly. Exactly. You're not just going to read you're not just going to read this book and then in January of last year be like, you know what? I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to start this online business and then do what we've done. Not that we've done that great, but we've done a hell of a lot better than most people who are in their quote first year. But like you said, this is like year 10 or 12 for me online. This is year, 17 in insurance for you. It's there's always more to the story. There's always more to the story. And that is the only point I'm making. Of course there are outliers. I told you I talked to a guy in Florida who's probably going to do $1 million, this year. You got guys who do $1 million in 1 year. You got guys that do 500,000, 400,000 in 1 year. Absolutely. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying, don't beat yourself up if you're not hitting that mark. Uh, you know, do what you can do, control what you can control. Find a playbook, whether it's our actual one or somebody else's, and just follow the system. But the reason why I really rail against this is because in my first 3 years, I was that guy who was willing to run through a brick wall and do anything anybody. And so what I ended up doing, and I've said this 100 times on this podcast, but I'd hear one guy, and then I would go and I'd call him, and I'd figure out how he'd do it, and then I'd call somebody else, and I'd see how he did it. And next thing you know, I had all this competing advice, instead of just following one system. And then the ugly little truth of it is the longer I was in the game, once I got to know behind the scenes a little bit more, I realized, oh, that guy who's done, was top young producer. Well, his uncle brought him in on 90% of his book. Well, no wonder. Not there's anything wrong with that, but that's not the guy that I want to go learn from, because I'm not you. And I wrote a newsletter on this. You have to find a mentor who's doing it, who did it how you're doing it. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm saying? That is the key. It's not that there's a good way or a bad way or a righteous way or an unrighteous way. It's just you have to find the guy doing it your way. or else you guys are talking, it's, it's apples and oranges and it's not going to work. That's
I
really
hit
the genesis of
you.
all this for me.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Before you literally started talking, I wrote down a note so I wouldn't forget. But I said when you fall in this comparison trap, or you see something that looks shiny and new and you want to chase it, what happens is if you're always looking, right, you're always changing, you're never actually getting better and just going all in on one approach and you got to give it proper time. Like you do this for 30 days, it didn't work. I'm going to try cold calling. That didn't work. I only got one meeting. I'm going to try mass emailing. That didn't work. I only got 2 results. Like anything you try, you have to stick with it and actually give it a fair shot. And I think if you always have like the shiny object syndrome, you're always going to be looking, always changing. And then you're going to look back 3-4 years later and be like, dang, dude, like my results suck. Well, you never really honed in on one process and perfected it, right? And gotten so good at it. And I shared this story on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, go do that. But it was basically how an underwriter did $100,000 their first year with no sales experience, and every year after that, I'm pretty sure the guy's done 100 ever since. But the reason I appreciated the guy so much is first day of the office, he comes by my desk or my cubicle, wherever, and he's like, "Man, hey, I heard I should talk to you. Like, what did you do?" And I literally told him what to do, and it was so simple. It was like, "All right, man, here's what you got to do: 200 prospects, and then always add it to it daily, and then start calling people 40 calls a day, every single day. Use this super simple script where all you do is say, hey, would you ever be open to a conversation on the insurance? Because I know you have cold call reluctance. That will help with that confidence that you're lacking, because it's super simple. And then anytime you talk to someone and they say, call me back, write it on a list called a follow-up later list. And then keep track of everyone's X dates. This is before we had insurance X dates and all that stuff. So you literally had to find the X dates and then keep it on an Excel list. Well, dude, the guy did 110K his first year, never had produced ever, right? And then second year, I think he did 120K, whatever. And then I've left since then, but I know he was just super consistent, and he just took ownership, right? And he'd always come back and thank me. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. And I was like, dude, don't thank me. You're just following basic advice. And what's funny? That advice that I gave him, I got from my brother way before I was in the financial leasing industry, before I got into insurance. My first sales job, I didn't know what the heck to do. He told me one day, make these tallies every day, make 40 tallies, 40 calls at the end of keep track of the people. And I just passed on what I learned. So I'm not special. I don't have any original thoughts about this method really. Now I do have some nuance, combining insurance and all that stuff with the sales stuff, but yeah, so I always like that story because I'm like, dude, the guy just followed the basics. And then we had other guys who tried to do networking, launches, get their CIC, all this other crazy stuff. And this guy and they would flop out, fail. And this one guy just stuck to the basics. And every day he'd be in there making his calls. That's all he did, stuck to it. And I just think it's pretty cool and a good testimony to the power of, consistency and staying disciplined. And that's the last thing, I'll say is, I know we talked about motivation last week and growing that uh, discipline, that small muscle that controls our discipline. And I always like this too, is like discipline as a producer is so much more important than motivation will ever be, because your motivation is going to go up and down. And especially you're going to compare yourself, even if you try not to compare yourself up. Oh, that person did 400 on social, I'm doing none. You start questioning yourself, you change things. Well, if your motivation is going like this as well, guess what your results are going to do? Suck. Right? So it's like,
You mean if your discipline goes like this too?
yeah, if you're disciplined, because your motivation is going to go like this for sure. We're just humans. But when your discipline can stay like this, your results are going to go way, 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 way up. So yeah, I think, and that's literally the number one skill I think almost as a producer that I would look for, is someone who can stay disciplined regardless of how they feel or what's happening around them. It's like, you got to stay disciplined, dude.
That's a really good point. And we've talked about this. I will admit it. Discipline is not my strength at all. Whether it's, well, no matter what it is, discipline is not my strength. I more go in spurts where I'll back myself into the corner and then I'll just go ham for like 2 months, and then I'll back myself into a corner and then whether it's weight loss or relationships or whatever. That's what I do. I'm big highs and big lows. And so I don't think I've ever asked you this question before. And if you tell me meditation, I'm just going to end the call. But why do you think that you are so much more even keel? How much of it is nature versus nurture? How much is genetics versus like a practice that you've developed?
That's a great question, man. I won't say anything about meditation. I didn't even start doing that till 3 years, 4 years ago. So I wouldn't say it's really that. I did always feel a little bit intrinsically motivated, right? Growing up, anytime I played sports, worked out, I'd always kind of be the hardest worker, right? First one finishing the mile and in football, camp, whatever. So I don't know if it's all nature, but I would say the part that I would say is nurture. And if you're a parent out here, this might be important. But my dad was always like one of those people like worked 6 days a week, got up at 5, got home at 5. And like I think just seeing that discipline, um, had to do it to raise the family of 4. We, weren't living a lavish lifestyle as a mailman. So it's like I think just him doing that every single day probably wore off on me seeing that. And it was always, and then I would say, also I remember my mom growing up too was always is like, it was kind of like the suck it up mentality. Like, hey, I remember one time in high school, I made a big mistake in a football game and they threw a touchdown pass over my, I was free safety. I gave him a touchdown, probably cost us the game, or I don't know if it did or it hurt. And the coach afterwards, this is high school, right? You're not being paid. And he kind of blasted me right in the local paper, town of 20,000. It's kind of a big deal to blast a kid. Now I read it and didn't think anything, and people even wrote to like the voice of the people and said, "Hey, this is terrible. Coach should never say this about a high school athlete. They're amateurs." Well, my mom like went to the coach and said, "Hey, I have no issue with what you said. You should say that if that's what you felt." And I don't know if she wrote to the paper too to kind of defend the coach. And in my heart, I didn't even take it personally. I like to be coached hard. So I don't know. Maybe it's hard to say. I think it's probably a combination, but I think a lot of it probably is environment, and it was just the way I was raised. I don't know if that helps or hurts people listening to this. I think we could all work. You can work on that skill, though. I mean, I think you can work on discipline. Um, right? Or am I wrong? Do you
Yep.
feel like? Do you feel like? To sort of flip the question back to you, do you feel like you could improve on discipline? Like, do you think there's things you could do to get better at it, or do you feel kind of helpless? Like, oh man, I'm just always
Oh
going to
no,
be.
1,000%. I think it kind of goes back to, I don't know if it was last podcast, maybe it was last podcast, where it's like I'm almost 40 years old. I have been the way that I am for 40 years. I have, like grooved those neural pathways. And so the thing that kind of resonates with me is what we talked about, where it's like just picking something and then just making small changes and stacking them. Because I think that
Yep.
ultimately discipline comes down to and preparation and like putting yourself in a position to succeed, right? So that's kind of how I look at it. And I have not missed a mile yet, by the way. So
Good for you, man.
I have, yeah, I've ran a mile every day since, yeah. But anyways, yeah, if it can't be changed, then, God, I'm fucked.
Hey, well, this is what I would say. If you're an agency
We're all screwed.
if you're an agency principal, listen to this, or a manager, or just maybe your own agent, no manager. I think this is one other important thing I had learned. For those who don't know, I started my career at Federated Insurance, which is very rigid. You're a direct writer, you're captive. So, but one thing I always liked about them is they laid out a business plan for you to follow. It's like, and they would always just drill us here, follow the business plan, right? And it pissed a lot of people off because it's like I don't want to be micromanaged and all this stuff. But I tell you what, if you were not disciplined, it created that structure that you need. And so I would say maybe you can't inherently be intrinsically change that, right? At age 40. But you can surround yourself with a framework or accountability people to hold you accountable and give you that structure you need. Not everybody listening needs that structure, but there is a lot of people I think who do, and especially a lot of younger agents who do, because this is just a different animal trying to sell insurance. It's not like selling tech or some other stuff. And I think without that structure, you'll get lost out there at networking lunches and drop-ins and golf events and learning and taking CIC course. All of a sudden you look back, it's like, oh man, I'm making 20 calls a week. I'm not hitting my numbers. Well, yeah, dude, you got to follow this framework. You got to follow a business plan.
You're 27 years old, you get hired by this agency, and you're sold on the dream of renewals and building this asset, this book of business, and the longer you do it, the bigger it's going to grow and the more money you're going to make. And you're like, man, if I can just do this for like 10 years, that's going to set me up for the rest of my life. And then you go in and they give you a desk and a cube and they say, we'll give you $700 to go get your CIC. Write down a list of people you know, get meetings, whatever, go join a golf club. You just got to get out there and get seen. And then 6 months later, they say, hey, why haven't you written anything? Like, that is the experience of most new producers. You know, and like, this industry is hard enough to take somebody and to just throw them out on an island or give them a mentor that doesn't give a shit about helping them anyways, or didn't actually do it from scratch. Meanwhile, they're having to do it from scratch. That's my big beef with the industry. Obviously, it's hard. Obviously, not everybody can do it, but you can't tell me that the 90% failure rate is because 90% of people who try it can't do it. I just don't believe that. I just genuinely don't believe that.
I agree.
Oh,
I agree. I think it should be.
Meanwhile, they see a guy on the sales call who did 400,000, and they're like, "Oh man, I'm the worst," but they don't know the story behind it. They didn't go through the deal flow. They have no idea. It's just they see that they're not producing. They see this outlier who's done incredible, and again, it's just it's just a cycle. It's what we people deserve better.
Yeah, no, 100%. And ultimately, isn't what matters your income? I mean, what if someone you're comparing yourself against is at a large agency and you're at a small deal, but you're making 60%, and they're making 25%? You know, so there's just we could go down so many rabbit holes with this. That's just another example, of why the whole comparison things. Or I know several guys out there listening and fans of the show and people that we interact with are like, dude, I got to service my own book. I got to be my own account manager. Well,
right.
Dude, 100 might be tough. So there's just so many different factors. But I think ultimately, I think what you and I are both saying is, yeah, like go compare, benchmark yourself, compare, try to improve, but just don't get discouraged and find one thing that works for you and stick to it. Give it a fair shot. Be disciplined. And there's no reason that 90% should fail. I mean, it should be, I think 50%, right? I mean, I think it should be aligned with probably other sales professions. And I think 90 just seems way too high.
Agreed. Anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
No, go check out and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm putting up stuff, a lot of stuff out there. So
my boy's getting after it over there, huh? It's gotten a lot better since we started trying to crank it up a little bit.
Yeah. Speaking of learning from the 1% outlier, right? Ali Abdal is the guy's crushing on YouTube, probably one of the top YouTube creators. And so I'm trying to learn from him, right? But I'm not sitting here like, oh my God, my channel sucks, I'm quitting, or get all stressed out over it. I'm learning from it. So
we paid $1,000 of our own money to make Micah better at YouTube because he could just thrash around by himself trying to figure it out. But we made the investment, and we'll see what Micah can make happen on YouTube. So I guess my thoughts are find a method, stick with it. There's always outliers. Be careful trying to be a pioneer and find a new way. I'm not saying don't, but just remember, pioneers always take the arrows. Find a way that works for you and let time do its thing. Like Uncle Warren Buffett says, compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. So find something that works, do it every day, come hell or high water, and then look up in 10 years and see where you're at. That's what I think.
I like it. Wise words there.
All right. Well, everybody, we thank you. Appreciate you listening. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, go to maxrevenueletter.beehive.com. and just sign up there. Everything, that's a good starting point. There you can get to the producer playbook, you can get to the YouTube show, you can get to pretty much everything. And also, if you just want to see what we have, you can check the show notes as well. All the links will be in there. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening. We do not take it for granted. We know it's hard to do this job, and for you to take time out of your day to listen to two idiots talk about mid-market commercial insurance is not lost on us. So we appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Peace.